Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Torraine Walker TV. I am Torraine Walker. Thank you for joining me tonight. First, I want to apologize for not dropping any lives on you for the past couple of weeks, but I have been traveling a lot. I've been involved in a couple of conferences, and I've been doing a few face-to-face meetings in DC, and a couple of them in Miami and a few other spots. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to bring all my gear with me to really give you the lives. So I apologize for that, but I'm back on track now. So expect new content from me every week. Tonight, it's going to be a real heavy conversation, but it's going to be a good conversation. It's one that's long overdue, but it's one that we got to have. Some of you may be familiar with the Ferguson activist named Darren Seals. Darren Seals was one of the first people on the ground after the death of Mike Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. He was a very outspoken young man. He was a very direct person, so to speak. But you knew where you stood with this brother. Again, he was one of the first people on the ground in Ferguson, Missouri. He was one of the first people from St. Louis to be noticed by the media, and he was a source for on-the-ground information about the protest movement as the protests extended into the summer and autumns of 2014. Again, he was always blunt and outspoken, and that outspokenness turned to calling out people he felt were taking advantage of the energy of that movement, specifically certain members of what became known as the Black Lives Matter organization. Sadly, Darren Seals was murdered in September 2016, one of several black men killed in Ferguson who were involved in street protests. On Sunday, a previously classified FBI file revealed that the agency had Seals under surveillance and that Seals had once been detained by local police at the request of the FBI. Darren Seals was one of several black men killed in Ferguson who were involved in street protests. His killer was never found, and this new information, as well as the ongoing mystery regarding the financial dealings of the Black Lives Matter organization, have only added to some of the questions that many people and former activists involved with the organization have around that period in American history. It's a very heavy conversation, but it's one that's necessary, and we're about to get into it right now. And I want to bring in my panel who are very connected to this story to talk a little bit about it. First, I want to introduce Travis Harris. Travis Harris, PhD, is the Director of Black Revolutionary Education for the International Black Freedom Alliance and the Editor-in-Chief of the Journal of Hip Hop Studies. And he was also a Ferguson frontliner. He was on the ground with a lot of things were going on. So how you doing, Travis?
Oh, man. Hey, I'm here, bro. I'm here.
All right. Now, also
I'm ready.
I see you, man. You got your gear on and everything.
Yeah, man. I had to teach today, so I got on every Tuesday I wear all black. So yeah.
All right. And I want to introduce my next guest. Martin Henson is a writer, public speaker, and the executive director of the B-Man Foundation, an organization that focuses on creating support for black men. He's also a member of the BLM 10. Brother, how you doing?
I'm good. Happy to be here. Good to see y'all.
Good to see you too, man. Glad to have you brothers on this live with me, man, to talk about this really important subject and a real upstanding brother, Darren Seals. Let's get right into it, man. Travis, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts on these new revelations, man, that the feds were shadowing this brother and most likely other activists on the ground as well?
So I love it in the sense of black people always right? In the sense that, like, we've been saying this stuff, right? So those of us in Ferguson, like you said, I did go in 2014 during Ferguson October, and then since then I've been visiting pretty much every year and talking to people in Ferguson. And one of my main men, Torraine, who should be watching it in this, we've been saying this, right? This is the way. These are the conversations that we've been having. I don't know if something wrong with my video, so I hope everything good. But these are the conversations that we have been having for a while. So now it's like, okay, now this isn't just the black folks who are on the ground talking about this, who know it's true. Now this is something that the world has to deal with, because now you can't dismiss what we've been saying, especially since for people who are outside of St. Louis, the Riverfront Times is one of the mainstream news websites, web news, news media formats that puts out information. So this is big for them to. As I'm saying this, I'm actually surprised they even published this. So that in and of itself, this is big news. So now it's mainstream, and now it's something that people can't deny. We got to talk about.
Yeah, for real. Martin, I'd love to get your thoughts on this. What are your thoughts about this? This is stuff that's been floating around for the longest in activist circles, and now that it's been confirmed by the feds themselves, what do you have to say about this?
Yeah, not surprised. I used to be so paranoid about the way that I moved for a long time, and even just more recently where I started putting stuff online. So I thought about it fairly often, and I would see what was happening to people that have their information doxxed and being followed and having a lot of police presence. So it's not surprising. I think it's confirmation for what we all knew. And I think it goes against this sort of idea that he wasn't as important as what he was.
Yeah, no, that's a very real thing. we talked about this before, and if some of y'all who don't know the history of Darren Seals, also known as King D Seals on Twitter, this brother was again on the ground at the epicenter of Canfield when Mike Brown was murdered. And what we're dealing with right now is the fact that he was kind of marginalized and pushed out of a lot of the mainstream quote unquote activist spaces because he was a straight up street brother. He was very direct and he didn't have a lot of filters, but everything he said came to pass. So it's like, if you look at the history of that, you see how he was kind of like pushed out of the story to the point where he was barely talked about until his murder. Then all of a sudden he became a story again. And now we come to find out that a lot of the stuff that he was talking about and a lot of the things he mentioned about being shadowed were true. So it's just fascinating to see that this is coming out to the forefront now. Travis, you were on the ground in Ferguson, brother. Can you talk a little bit about Darren Seals and what he meant to the city and what he meant to that movement?
Yeah, so I need to give y'all this quote from my homie Torraine. Torraine also is in the IBFA. He's our director of Black organizing, and he said this, and I really want to make sure I deliver this clearly. Darren Seals was literally right in the middle of transforming from being Detroit Red to Malcolm X. So let that sink in, right? And so what we knew who he was as quote unquote Detroit Red, right? As being a street dude who was making moves, right? And if anybody know about St. Louis, let me give y'all a sense of what St. Louis is, right? St. Louis is usually considered one of the most dangerous cities in America. And when I was just there just a couple of months ago, we were setting up for our books and barbecue, where we have a Black Panther type program where we give our books and food to the community, right? Meeting both of their needs. While I was doing this, there was literally a shooting, right? Like people were shooting, and it was so normal that I just handed dude a book, dapped him up, went on. And just because of my background, I was just like, okay, this is normal. I should have not to say that this is how every Black person in St. Louis is, because that's another misnomer, right? Black, it was mainly love from Black people, but it's really like that, right? And he was really out there. So you got to think about somebody who's certified on the streets. So he certifies in the streets, and then he said, look, he recognizes that something needs to happen, just like many of us, right? When Mike Brown killing happened, he responds. He like, look, we need to do something about this. And like, as a hood dude, now I wasn't in the streets like that. Let me be clear. I'm not trying to claim anything like that. But as someone from that background, right, it prepares us to see life a certain way and to think about things a certain way, right? So now we see, first thing about this, right? You see a 18-year-old young Black male lay in the street for 4.5 hours, right? And I'm talking to people in Ferguson. They're like, we passed the point where we talking about his humanity. We like, do we need to do a animals' rights type thing? Because this is completely inhumane. So he witnesses this, right? So after he witnesses this, he actually gets out on the streets. Everybody know what happened with Ferguson. Ferguson turns the world upside down, right? And then as he's doing this, think about this, that background that he had, where he was in the street, he's making moves, and now he's making moves, not just as a hustler, but as an organizer in the movement. That's how he was on the ground. And because of that, right? So think about who he was talking to. So because he was already outside, he's talking to the people he knew outside, right? Why he's talking to the people he knew outside, now that he's joining the movement, he's talking to other people in the movement. So now, y'all can see how, like I said, he going from the Detroit Red to Malcolm X. He can pretty much talking to anybody now, right? Is this making sense? You see what I'm saying?
No, it makes perfect sense. I get it.
And so then, right, things begin to grow, and now he is organizing people. And when he will have organizing meetings, right, Literally hundreds of people are coming out. Let this sink in. A street dude who learns how to move in the movement is now organizing hundreds of people in St. Louis. And that's how it was.
No, I get it. And actually, I got a couple of clips that I'm going to play a little bit later so people can kind of get a feel for what you're saying and things that surprised me when I found the song. Martin, let me ask you, how important is it in the space of organizing that you have people who can talk to the public and have things they say resonate with the public and also resonate with people outside of the immediate circle that are being affected by this injustice? It seems like this brother had that, and it seems like there's a lot of brothers and a lot of sisters who have that, and they have that power to be able to pull in different people, but they don't get a lot of shine. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because Darren Seals feels like a microcosm of that sort of thing.
Yeah, that was a norm. So as I was listening to a lot of the videos that he was talking on, and he had a lot of heat for Black Lives Matter and the way that they came in and removed their agency and their voice and their resources that they were getting on the ground because they didn't have the savvy enough to be able to, or the skills or digital advocacy and social media things that were more new at the time to go in and pull in all those funds. But for him, coming from where he came from, he already knew how to speak to his community. So I can only imagine what it was like to come in and still be in the middle of grief because he still was a dude grieving by way of all the things that was happening and see all these things pulled away. So as he was starting to be uplifted, I think he challenged the narratives of what some other people who were showing up wanted to be and be seen as. So he was in the community what other folks were projecting themselves out to the CNNs and MSNBC. He was actually that thing. He was actually that dude. And I don't think we realize how many people there are like that because we treat activism like it's the all-star game. People trying to survive and fight white supremacy all the time. So he's just one of those stories that we get to know.
Yeah. And about that, something you mentioned like activism becoming like the all-star game. When you have something that grabs everybody's attention, that grabs world attention, especially something that's affecting Black communities, because usually in the world and worldwide, Black communities and things that happen in Black communities get short attention if it's not negative. When you grab that, when you have that many people coming into a space, there's no room to really vet who all's coming in.
Right.
And especially when you have Black mass movements, there's always going to be rumors of agents. There's always going to be rumors of informers and surveillance in Black movement spaces. And if we look at the history of Black movement spaces all the way back to the UNIA, usually decades after the fact, information comes out from government sources or people who used to work on the inside that proves that the rumors about agents and informers turns out to be true, or surveillance, definitely. This information about Darren Seals and the events leading up to his death came out a lot earlier than usual. Usually you don't hear about this stuff until 10, 20 years later. This came out 5, 6 years after the fact. You were both involved in social justice work. Have you felt the presence of agencies around your work? Travis, I'll ask you and then I'll go over to Martin again.
So I actually had a real life story. I used to I kind of don't like to say this publicly, but I used to be a BLM organizer.
It's all good.
I saw the light, y'all saw the light. But we actually was I got my PhD from the College of Women Married, and we actually were planning a basically a direct action during the homecoming week football game. And what we were going to do was we basically was going to rush the field, all blacked up, everything during the halftime and make a big statement, right? And think about this. This is 2014, 15. Y'all remember during this time there was a lot of direct actions. So we're planning it. And then when we get there, all of a sudden there's this huge, not only is there a huge police presence, the announcer says, students, you are not permitted onto the field. And long story short, somebody snitched. And
Mm.
so I'm sharing this story because I don't know if anybody know what Williamsburg is, Williamsburg, Virginia. But we were active, right? I ain't gonna lie, we were doing things. We were active. But I'm in Williamsburg, Virginia. So if I'm in Williamsburg, Virginia, and somebody actually snitched on us in that direct action, then that's an example of what has been, of course, been going on for ages, but what's going on right now in the movement. And it's so messed up, right? That this was somebody internally. And now that we know the whole story of BLM, is not as surprising. But at the time, it's like, hold on, we checking all our communication, right? Because none of what we planned on doing was publicly put out. So that means somebody internally have leaked this. And then not only did they leak it, they leaked it to the administration.
Mm. Martin, have you had any experiences like that through organizing or protesting?
Yeah, it's kind of unfortunately you kind of get this sort of thing. So I remember one time I was it was a thing for, I want to say, First Night Boston. There was some protest that we had planned. I don't remember. I did a good amount of them, and I'm getting up there, and a police officer walks right up to me and said, "Hey, let me talk to you." The chief. He's like, "Oh, well, you're like, can I just want to talk to you for a second?" So he wanted to talk to me during the duration of the protest. What I figured out as we had a few exchanges back and forth, and I went my way. But I didn't know how he knew me, how he got access to me, or who made him aware. The other part of it, this is one thing that makes political organizing within communities so important, is because a lot of it now is digital. They don't have to necessarily talk to somebody because they can set up those trucks and vans maybe less than a mile away and use technology in a way to be able to get signals from your phone. Now, at the time, I don't think at that time, it might have been 2014, I knew it in that way, but the idea that everybody could be an informant, everybody could be an agent, in my mind, we was like 20, 30 years behind. They don't even need people on the ground like that because we're not even using any sort of digital, like any ways to prevent the digital surveillance from happening. So it was just levels to it.
Gotcha. Um, Next question kind of taps into that sort of thing. Um, what was the energy like on the ground after all these things began to happen? Was it a more of a unified front about pushing back against police brutality, or was it more of different groups kind of coming together for this one thing, or was it a little bit more unified at first? Martin, I'll ask you. Martin, can you hear me? I think you might have you.
Oh, my bad. So
Yeah.
in Boston, it was, let's say this, there was a lot of momentum everywhere, but it wasn't particularly concentrated anywhere, if that makes sense. I went back and read through my writings on what I thought of BLM at the beginning, and I was in it and skeptical, because I realized that it didn't grow. There was no way to take in people from the community and expand their knowledge for them to take their spot. I realized that it was very centered around individuals and whoever had relationships with the larger BLM network. One of the founders, if that's what you want to call them, so-called founders, and it didn't grow. It felt like it was very territorial, but the general momentum of the community at large, it might have been different organizations in different areas, was big. If that makes sense.
Okay. Travis, let me ask you. Malcolm X used the term "make it plain" when talking to how to address the masses. Ferguson was the first time since the 70s that we saw everyday people have access to mainstream media to speak for themselves. And what we got was a lot of raw, real feelings from people dealing with marginalization. Darren and other people in different cities had a gift for this type of communication, like I said earlier, but he was locked out of having a larger platform where other people were able to have theirs. Why do you think that was?
Yeah, so talking to people in Ferguson, shadow banning is real, right? So they intentionally control the narrative. Like they would do things such as weaken the cell phone signals. This actually happens to me from time to time whenever I go to Ferguson. Like my phone wouldn't work as well. They will weaken the cell phone signals. They would literally cut out some of the satellites over Ferguson, so that the again trying to hinder the wireless technology. There was also control on the internet, so controlling tweets, Facebook posts, etc., to make sure that others didn't see that. And so all of this was all happening. And so then another thing, this and the crazy part, some of this stuff is still now going on now. I don't know if they're doing this on purpose or not, but literally every year when I go back for the Mike Brown commemoration, it's hard for me to do a live video. And it's like the signal keeps dropping, and this is actually pretty normal for people in Ferguson and in that surrounding area. So
I remember when I was out there a couple of years ago to do the Black Fathers panel and everything. We had a bunch of tech issues, and normally that never happens. You know what I mean?
Yep.
I don't know what the grid is like in St. Louis, but normally I've gone all other places and never had that happen. So yeah.
Yeah, and so no, this is real, and so this is like one of those conspiracy theories things, right? Where it's like, you know, one or two black people saying this, but literally when you have hundreds, maybe even thousands of black folks in St. Louis saying this, maybe it's actually happening.
Well, let's get back to what we were saying though. When we're talking about the gift for communication, can you talk a little bit about why you felt like he was locked out of having a larger platform?
Yeah, man.
The reasoning for that?
Because Darren Seals was about that life, right? Just like you said, to make it plain, like he was really about that life. So let's break it down this way, right? And because I listened to some of the stuff he was saying. He said, first of all, I got money. I don't need y'all money, so he can't be brought. Second of all, he came from being outside, so he's not scared of going outside. And third of all, which I can relate to, because of that, he not worrying about. So think about what they do with. This is what's happening right now with a lot of like activists and organizers and movement people, quote unquote. Look at what they try to do. They try to give them blue checks, book deals, money, time, all that. He didn't want none of that, right? You know what he did want? He wanted freedom. So since he couldn't be bought, right? He cared about freedom. Then the things that usually would draw people away wasn't working on him. So now he can say whatever he wanted to say, right? And nobody's gonna either stop him, and what he's saying is making sense, right? So he's saying, he's speaking truth, he's making it plain, but he's making it so plain that the masses is understanding him. Like I said, you got 100 people coming to the meetings he's organizing. So hundreds of people like, yo. So he's talking that talk, and he can't be bought. So yeah, that's why they wanted to silence him, because they didn't want a message like that to get out to the masses, because the masses were able to understand. Detroit Red to Malcolm X.
Martin, let me ask you. You're coming from the activist background of like doing movement building and community building and having to deal with different populations. And again, I'm going to go back to the idea of making something plain. Have you seen sort of a disconnect between like people who I like to call professional activists and how they talk to people on the ground, and how people who are poor and working class maybe aren't able to relate to these people, and vice versa?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a class issue. And part of the analysis that happened relative to the BLM movement starting is that it didn't have a class analysis in the beginning. And I would say even now. So a lot of us, and I would include myself as somebody who's been able to move by way of having education and opportunities into a different status. But what you have to do if you want to join the movement is make sure the voice of the movement stays within the people who don't have that, because most of us don't have these sort of opportunities. So what you would see, like I was saying, and what Darren Seals was talking about, people came in and used a level of elitism and expertise in using these digital tools to extract money and resources away from Ferguson. Like people would legit Go down to Ferguson, come back to Boston, and show you like they punched their activist bingo card, like I'm valid now. And I'm sure they did it. They did it there. They did it in many other cities. Now, I'm not saying that's most of the people who went down there and did it, but you have to have a certain ability to navigate and move freely to even do that. And there's an analysis there. And that doesn't mean that everybody's not needed for what they're bringing, but we got to dig through that and figure out what that means for the movement as a whole. Is if every time it's time to have a voice, it's only people like me or people who got doctorates or people who coming from media or people who from LA or people who know how to, who are following a 50,000, 100,000, who know how to flip that and go make engagement. That's not most people. And it's not the average person that's in those situations. As we know that a lot of people who deal with police brutality are poor. They're poor and they're just trying to figure out how to navigate through it. And they also become the most radicalized and people who lead these type of things or know that life, like a brother like Darren Seals. So I don't feel like in the beginning of the movement, we really analyzed who was getting the primetime feature, whose voices was being uplifted.
To that point, if we're going to be talking about activism and we're going to talk about organizing, I think you're right that there is a level of elitism that comes from the idea of activism. I don't think it happened at first, but I think what happened was, and y'all both can correct me if I'm wrong, I feels like because what happened with Mike Brown and later on with George Floyd was so visceral that the people who immediately were out there speaking about that and pushing back were the poor and the working class. And because the media only cares about a story, they went down there. So the first people they spoke to were people who were on the ground, who had no filter, who weren't afraid to cuss, weren't afraid to call out anybody. And then as the movement grew and more of these things became more commonplace, unfortunately, because there seemed like there was a death every week, some sort of police involved shooting or something like that, more and more people who knew how to work the media became more and more prominent, and they were able to get to these places when things started happening. Instead of the media going to people who were from those communities, they had designated activists, like for lack of a better term, they would go to, and that's how a lot of resources got siphoned away from the movement. Travis, would you say that's right?
Yeah. So this answer is actually multifold, right? I'm never gonna forget the dude that Fox News went to interview with his shirt off. They're like, and he's like, it seems like you guys are angry. He was like, what you mean? Yeah, we angry, right? I don't know if y'all remember that, but I'm never gonna forget that, right? So initially, you're right. That's how it was. A couple of things happened. One, there were people who positioned themselves in front of the mic, right? For example, and this is somebody said in the comments, tell the story when Darren Seals smacked Torraine. Remember the dude with the blue vest? You looked up, you saw that dude everywhere, right? And this is the thing. This is why BLM was so good. So building off what Martin said, right? How BLM underdeveloped the movement. What happened was people like me, people like Torraine, and a lot of people who were on the front lines, we were doing the work, right? And so because we were doing the work, we really weren't that focused on getting in front of the camera. But BLM and people affiliated with BLM, the people like DeRay, for example, they were moseying their ways right in front of the camera. So, like you said, while it started off with those on the ground, because that's what it was coming to, while we continue to do the work, because we were focused on the work, and BLM, and you know what, I hate to say it, but we got to give them the credit. BLM was magnificent in media, right? And what we say in our org all the time is BLM figure out how to control the air. So what they would do is they control the quote unquote air by getting in front of the camera. We continue to do the work. And while we were doing the work, like we're working, we weren't even thinking about the media. So of course we learned from that. We grew from that. But I would say that's what happened.
All right. Travis, I want to stick with you really quick. And Martin, I'm gonna come back to you in a second. Your background, for people who don't know, your name is Dr. Travis Hood Scholar, but you actually are a PhD in an academic, and so is Martin. I just do media, so I'm just going to go. I'm going to defer to you real quick. Let's talk a little bit about language, because if you're going to talk about a class analysis, we have to talk about the power of language. And language and words are really just placeholders for ideas. And if you know how to work media and you know how to work language, you can make language do anything you want. Um, a common tactic that the power structure uses to neutralize a lot of social justice organizations is language and elite capture and division. Um, One thing that Darren spoke on and he was very articulate about speaking on was the sort of mission creep that happens in political struggle. For example, agendas began to take shape that had nothing to do with the original reason why people were out there on the ground, in Ferguson and in Baltimore and in Minneapolis. Um, that's a very important concept because we have to talk about what that looks like for the people who are on the ground putting in work. Because if you're so focused on the work, you don't think about sometimes the language that's going around. Um, and that language and those agendas that came out of academia began to take precedence over the original mission of getting justice for Mike Brown and George Floyd and Philando Castile and people. Do you think he was right about that? And can you talk about that from an academic standpoint about the power of language and how language can be manipulated? And then I'll swing back to Martin with that.
Yeah, D. Seals killed that, right? So let's look at what happened. You had these particular terms that were actually already in academia prior to 2014, right? And so after you have BLM been able to position themselves in front of the camera, and I'm not sure if this is public or not, but BLM, the co-founders, actually worked with several academics, right? So now their conversations with academics is being intertwined with the movement. So now the movement language is becoming terms like intersectionality, right? Or phrases like, we have nothing to lose but our chains. And this is very disheartening because if you think about Asada and what Asada stood for, it wasn't for let me displace the black bodies, the poor black people, because actually Asada was for the people. It wasn't let me silence the people and say we need to use a particular language, that if you're not using this language, we're not going to listen to you. But it was what they did was they used Asada, they created particular terms that were originally academic terms and then moved them to the masses. So if we say intersectionality now, everybody knows what that is. If I say who Kimberly Crenshaw is, everybody knows who that is. The problem with that, like D. Seals called this out from day one, right? I was talking to Torraine. Torraine and D. Seals are very close. And Torraine was like, yeah, D. Seals saw this way back in 2014. Again, like I said, because of his background, he was akin to what was coming. And he said, look, this is what's coming. They are going to be able to manipulate and maneuver and create a particular narrative. And with this particular narrative, use this particular language so that if you're not speaking this language, then you're off, right? You're not right. You're not in the right place. And then let's use this narrative, this language, and let's put that in front of the media. And that's what media will spread and run with.
All right. Martin, can you speak to that a little bit about the danger of language being manipulated to push agendas that have nothing to do with why people are upset and why they're out there?
Yeah. I'll start with it, starting from the BLM stuff. So I used to go hard in BLM when I first believed it, and it push. I was like, "It's a party line, and that's just what I'm on," because I'm trying to get free. Maybe I don't see all of it and all of the ways that it can be moved to navigate us toward freedom, but I'm a pusher, so I should go out and speak and do it, so on and so forth, in the interest of moving us closer toward getting rid of police brutality. But thinking about language and narrative, so you had Trayvon Martin before that, then you have Ferguson. A lot of people don't know Ferguson was trending higher than even George Floyd. Like, that was a moment, like how we in the world and how we thought about activism. That was the whole moment that I don't think we'll have at any time soon, at least not in the next 20 years. But the story of who started the movement and how changed. because you started to have the people who were the founders of BLM there. First, they were just people who were part of Black Lives Matter team or the organization. That might have been even before it was an organization. They said they were just there. Prominent voices wanted to shift the conversation. Over the years, it moved from being significant part of the movement to being founders of the movement, to be that the movement start from a hashtag. Hashtag wasn't even viral at that time the same way that Ferguson was. So the way that they've been able to go through media relationships to tell a particular story and a narrative that was relative to what brought them to the movement, but at the same time telling everybody that this is what the movement is as a whole, it changed how we thought about what our goals were. So for me, as
See, Martin, are you there?
yeah, I'm still here.
Okay, you froze up just real quick.
Okay, we stopped talking about police brutality because the way that language has been used was slowly being shifted over time, and people were using their relationships with both academia and the traditional print media to push a different sort of narrative. And that's what I felt like I was struggling with when I was seeing happening, like many in the same way that Darren Seals kind of articulated that.
Okay. On that note, let me what I want to do is I want to move the conversation into people being able to see some examples of what we're talking about. Once that narrative began to shift, some of the language and some of the tactics that you saw on the ground began to shift as well. And I want to start here by I'm going to put up a couple of tweets that some of the things that Travis mentioned. This is Darren from, I believe, 2015. This is something he said on 19th of February 2015. They used our emotions, our anger, and hurt to get us in the streets. They encouraged us to keep going only to generate funds for them. And that sounds almost exactly like what you were talking about, Travis, how like people were so focused on like their safety and trying to put energy out into the streets and trying to put energy out into the movement to get people aware that they weren't looking at how things were going on above them. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? Let me see.
Because the focus was freedom, right?
Mm-hmm.
And let me say this, because this is going to tie together what you were saying and what Martin was just saying. When I was originally in BLM, I really didn't care about a lot of the stuff, a lot of the issues that I saw either, because I said, look, like Martin was highlighting, this is a one chance that we're seeing Black people are unified, right? And this is because the slogan was Black Lives Matter. And everybody agreed that Black Lives Matter. So because of that, I was all in, right? Even though it said that we need a decenter Black men, right? Even though BLM said we need a decenter Black men, I'm all in because one, I was at Ferguson, right? I was on the streets. I experienced that energy that D. Seals was talking about. And because of that, I'm like, you know what? I am willing to make the sacrifices, the discomfort, because the overall goal was freedom, right? And this is the thing. This got lost in the messaging because of BLM and stuff. Yes, we wanted to end police brutality. Yes, we wanted the police to stop killing us, but that's not all we wanted, right? We wanted to actually get free. So we were trying to figure out ways, how in the world can we not only get off the plantation, but get rid of the plantation altogether, right? So what has happened because of the whole BLM stuff, the freedom narrative actually got lost. So what D. Seals was on, what I bet you Martin was on, if he wanted to chime in, even while we were with BLM, we were on Black freedom.
All right, and I just want to let the audience know that the reason we keep bringing up the organization BLM is because people don't understand that there were a lot of different organizations at the beginning of this that were focused on trying to get the Black freedom. It just so happened that umbrella organization became the one that got most of the elite capture and it got most of the media attention. And that's where a lot of this information and a lot of this stuff started coming from. So that's what that's about. But if you were to go back and look at the history, a lot of it was just individual cells of people in different cities who were trying to come together. There was no one organization that was controlling all this, but that's the way it's looking right now. So that's why we're talking about that. And Martin, let me get you in on here because I'd love to get your take on this situation.
Yeah, shout out to Elite Capture. I was trying to figure out a way to work it in, but you got it. Yeah, that was what they did was I'm gonna break it down for you in a way that a lot of people don't understand. So you had a lot of people who were coming out because they were galvanized on police brutality. And for the elites, the liberal, powerful media or who occupied those positions, it was easier for them to approach the issues going on in the Black community from a diversity point of view. And you say, hey, we need to have a more diverse approach to whose voices that we need to hear. And for me, I was like, that's cool, as long as we get to this police brutality and work toward freedom, whatever way that happens. Over time, the police brutality became removed from the overall goal, and now we're only talking about diversity. So when Darren Seals was talking and struggling with, at times, saying homophobic comments, I think he was trying to recognize what I ended up having more time to understand and see what was happening, is that, hey, we still want to do this thing in this way. We still want freedom for Black people. We still want to address police brutality, and we can still talk about diversity in our community at the same time. How he was framed from the videos that I was listening to is that he saw people come in who didn't have that as an interest when they came into the Ferguson or other Black communities. They were only interested in a very particular narrative or a particular philosophy to what we needed to get towards freedom, which didn't quite always resonate with how the people in the community were thinking about it. Now, that doesn't mean that diversity is bad or inclusion is bad. It meant that the public needed to be needed advocacy and needed education to get to the point to think about how these two things related. And that never happened. People just came in and extracted it and really leaned into what the interest was of like the white liberal Democrats or progressives, and who were largely funding certain types of initiatives.
Yeah, that's
that.
Absolutely. Go ahead, brother.
Yeah, and the thing is, right, and just as one who was on the inside, I feel like the problem is that when they brought in this focus on diversity, we can focus on diversity without it being divisive. And that's the key, right? We can have unity without uniformity. And the issue that Darren Seals was highlighting is, why does it have to be diversity in the sense where now we need to actually be judged or harsh or condemn someone, right? How about we create a space that's welcoming to all, but not a space in which we got to create a space that's welcoming to all, where we got to say, well, these people are this, these people are this, and these people are this, and we need to put these people need to be decentered. And yeah, I know Black men are the ones who are dying, but Black men, y'all should actually be quiet. So the thing I want to be clear about what Darren Seals was saying is not that he was against any particular sexuality or any particular gender, etc. It was that he was against division, right? So how about we have diversity? How about we have unity, but we don't have to have uniformity?
Yeah, and I think that goes back to what I was saying earlier about the power of language, because Darren was a street dude, and his language was very direct, and he said some things about individuals that could be construed as homophobic, and some of them were maybe derogatory about individuals, but that's the language he spoke. But outside of that, everything else he said had validity. But because he didn't have the right language, so to speak, it made it easy for people to kind of dismiss what he said. And to be completely honest, when I first became aware of him, I was still at Huffington Post, and I was paying attention to because he was one of the main outlets I heard from, like on Twitter and social media. When he started pushing back against some of the stuff that he felt was wrong, some of the language he was using made me back away from him because of the ways he was framing things. And I understand, just from my point of view, that made me feel that way. I can understand how it could make somebody who's coming into a new situation with new verbiage and hearing that make them feel. But as time went on, he kind of went away from that, but I still kept paying attention, and I noticed that the stuff he was saying was beginning to line up with things that other people were saying. So it gave it a little bit more validity. But yeah, that ties into how people can easily be marginalized and pushed out of a movement if you don't have the right language, which goes back to what I was saying earlier about language being the barometer for how people are able to move in some of these spaces.
And Torraine, like, and let me ask you this, because you're a media person.
Mm-hmm.
We think about this, right? Because I know Darren Seals from people who spent time with him, like hours and days and months and years, right? Can't you get what sense do you get of a person based on a 5-minute, 10-minute, 15-minute clip, or even a 30-second clip?
Really, you can't really get much of anything. You can feel what they feel that day or what they do. But here's the thing, because I know how media works, and also I grew up in a generation before everybody lived on social media, I know that you had to actually talk to people and get a feel for who you're talking to really feel them out. Because you know that when you grow up on the block, there might be people who, if you put them in front of a mic, in front of, like, if you put them on like the Daily Show, the audience is going to have a heart attack, and you know what I mean, and they're going to freak out because they never heard language like that. That doesn't mean that person isn't bad. That just dude has absolutely no filter, but he's a good dude. And you can also have somebody who knows how to say all the right things. They know they have all the technical verbiage down. They have all the quote unquote political correct and woke verbiage down, but they're snakes. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Slick stuff. That's all it is. But if you don't know that, you don't know that. And we're dealing with a generation of people who are in their 20s who've grown up with social media. They don't know any better. You know what I mean? So what they see off jump is what they expect. So I think that's what happened too.
And just to jump in there, when I first got into BLM, I was hearing folks talk about men and patriarchy and sex and all the things. I thought I was going to be working with those brothers, and we were going to be doing some political education and some cultural awareness, and that never happened. So I think the contradiction that was always wild to me is how this is the sort of the language and the narrative that came from particular organizations. I was a part of Black Lives Matter, but I've seen it and felt it from other organizations as well. That people in the community, low income, the hood, whatever you want to call it, they were too rough to deal with. But you can go talk to funders and mayors and city councilors and people on boards all day, and you don't have any problem bridging whatever gap their racism has afforded them by the way that they've grown up. But you can't deal with this over here. When you have men that are willing to, like, I'm with it and engage. So it was the way that power was shifting and moving. I learned a lot. I can 100% say I learned a lot about what movements mean and how valuable are the people are that are experiencing the violence that's happening in their community.
For real. I want to keep going. I want to do some real quick house cleaning real quick. Shout out to everybody in the chat and everybody who's putting up some really good questions. Like I said at the beginning of the show, if you have some questions, put them in there. We'll put them up on the screen, or I'll put them up there so we can talk a little bit, because y'all are really engaged with this and I really appreciate it. While we're here, if you like the content that we're doing, please support the channel. If you want to show some love, Cash App Torraine Walker, PayPal Real Torraine Walker. My Patreon is Torraine Walker. Everything's under my name. Venmo Torraine Walker, and you can also follow the socials. Everything I do comes out of my pocket, and the things that y'all are willing to give me love for. So I appreciate that. I just put this up really quick. So if you have anything, do that. I'm also getting ready to try to build a studio, so we can buy more equipment, because I think some of the conversations we have really deserve to be done a little bit better. And I also plan to try to bring on some staff so we can have somebody do this, so I'm not always a one-man band. So again, if you like the content I'm making, please support the channel and we'll keep everything going. I want to move on to one more thing. What I want to do now is I want to talk a little bit about message shift and movement creep. Now we're coming out of the Ferguson era. Darren Seals has been murdered, and the field is kind of open for everybody to say what they want to say, because again, there's like a lull where there's not so many deaths, and the community and the media sort of moved on somewhat. But in 2020, we come to George Floyd and his murder. What I want to do is play a couple of clips. One is going to be from Darren Seals, and then I'm going to play a little bit of how things started moving after that. This is Darren Seals. I think this is in 2015, speaking in Ferguson, not too long after the killing of Mike Brown. And I just want to play this clip, and then I'll play another one so you can kind of see the tenor of how the movement began to shift. This was the verbiage in 2015.
Man laying in the streets, dead for 4 hours. It was me, a couple other faces out here, and that's it. Wasn't no CNN, wasn't no Jesse, wasn't no Al, wasn't none of that. We gotta start valuing black lives. Value these young men. They the next presidents, the next governors, the next mayors, and y'all write them off. The elders, they don't even respect us how they should. We respect our elders, but respect us too, love us too. We the after crack era. We the AC generation, after crack. Our fathers left us. Our fathers left us. We are the monster y'all created when y'all left those homes and let the women raise us. The mothers raised us. I love these women out here. I represent these women out here. I'm gonna tell y'all something. All of this cameras and light don't mean nothing. Guess what? Cause when all the fame gone, CNN ain't coming us no more, it's us out there gonna be fighting and dying every day how it started. So respect us, love us, unite with us, cause we're gonna be on that front line dying. We all Mike Brown, we Mike Brown. The elders ain't Mike Brown, they not gonna kill you, they gonna kill us. We need some type of economical freedom for these people. I'm gonna wrap it up. This must be said. This must be said. I'm gonna need everybody out here. This is my idea. Let's play a community ties. Like I pay 10% of church. If everybody out here will pay 5% of everything they own and put it into a joint account, and I started. I make $1,000 a week. I'll pay I'll pay $50 every week into an account. So we can build some jobs for these same young men that's dying for y'all every day. That's what we need. Economical freedom. Quit spending the black dollars out of the black neighborhood. Because every time you spend $1 out of our neighborhood, they become richer and we become poor. Man laying in the street.
So that was the energy that the movement was on in St. Louis and around the country at that time. That was Darren Seals speaking in 2015 at a rally in Ferguson. Yeah, that's what people were on. That's the kind of energy. People were outraged against police brutality. They were outraged at the fact that people were being brutalized in that city, and they had enough and they pushed back. That's what people were on. Travis, you seem like you're feeling something, brother. You okay?
Yeah, man. I when I went to Ferguson a couple of months ago, I broke down. I just want to say this just real quick. I don't want to slow things down, but y'all, this isn't a game, right? This isn't a game. When I was in Ferguson, August the 9th, so about a month from the day, I just broke down. Because like he said, the cameras are gone. I'm talking to Mikhail on a regular basis, Mike Brown's wife. Right? The Brown family is trying to move on with their lives. And even though the cameras are gone, and even though people are just trying to go on with the people not really paying attention to it, because I can tell you, I go every year. And every year the crowd of people who there get smaller and smaller, right? But also every year we see corporations, we see organizations, we see nonprofits. We hear about $90 million. We hear about $250,000. So all these other people getting more money and more money and more money. Well, I talked to the person who was handling the Browns family account. And there was a time where the money stopped flowing. So I'm having this response to that because it's taking me back. Y'all, this is real. This ain't a game. And the reason why he was talking about the money, why this is so important, because the people who actually need it ain't getting it.
Yeah.
But all these other people who's using their name are.
Yeah. I'm gonna Martin, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I just want to say that these are men in communities that still grieving. when I listen to Darren Seals talk, I hear a man that's still grieving and still trying to figure out how to move from day to day. So this activism and revolutionary thinking, it doesn't come from an absence. It doesn't come from people just deciding that they want to move and support Black community alone. It's because they've lost something. And all of that money that was extracted from Ferguson and is still hovering around these organizations that have no constituency, all of that money could be used to develop victim assistance funds, because when people die by the government, they don't get the same level of funds more often than not. There's not any group therapy or trauma centers that were created from that. There was a lot of organizations that were built. There were a lot of people that were getting salaries. There were a lot of people making money off of funds, funds and taking vacations and talking internationally. But these sort of interventions help people who are still alive, because most people who are victims of police brutality don't die, go to jail. And if these systems are not being interrupted by all of this funds that are being raised, like, what are we really doing? So those are the things that really sit with me.
Gotcha. I want to move on to the second clip I want to play. Again, you know, after Ferguson, after Baltimore, after the first Minneapolis St. Paul uprising, we come to George Floyd. This is basically the catalyst for worldwide awareness of the black plight in America and police brutality. But the energies changed after the first outrage that you saw on the streets in Minneapolis and also in other cities in response to that, and also in solidarity with what happened in Minneapolis. By this time, the movement idea had been fully entrenched, and it had been, the idea of what a movement looks like was totally different than what it looked like when Darren Seals was alive and some of these other brothers and sisters. And I want to play another clip from that time. And I just want the audience to see how the movement, how things had changed from what you heard from Darren Seals to what you hear at that time. And this one isn't that long, so you can just draw your own conclusions. But here we go. This is about 6 months after George Floyd. This was a part of a campaign for awareness for Black power, for Black issues. Here we go.
It's your girl, Shayna.
What will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation.
That was really funded. Somebody pulled money out of funds that were created after the outrage of George Floyd to celebrate Martin Luther King's birthday with a twerk off in DC at the Lincoln Memorial, at the Jefferson Memorial, and the Martin Luther King's monument. I played that because I wanted people to see how the energy shifted from the things that Darren Seals and people on the ground were talking about to where things are now. And that was sort of a harbinger of what people think a protest is now, to where you can twerk, you know, at the polls, you can twerk on a cop car, you can twerk on a tank, you know, you can draw pictures in the street like you're a kid, and that's considered the revolution now. Darren Seals was speaking, and some of the earlier movement people were speaking with very little money. And this is what came with all the funding that came into these organizations, and you get that. Travis, I see your face, but I'm gonna go over to Martin first. I'd like to get your thoughts about like how the movement got commercialized and how this protest energy got commercialized, and when it got commercialized, we ended up with this.
First of all, let me plug BLM chapter statement. BLM 10 put out a whole list outlining when stuff started to get fugazi, and it lists different chapter statements that they put out once they saw that the organization specifically was starting to move in a different direction. My journey in activism is like a microcosm to this, because I would have arguments with other activists in the BLM chapter I was in, telling them that BLM can't mean everything, because that's what it will become. It become like a open funding source for anything that had Black people attached to it. And you can go and do that and say it's for freedom, because it doesn't have any objectives or any goals related to it. And I saw BLM starting to, the movement as a whole, starting to expand so far beyond actual police brutality that you would start getting shit like that people know they could fund and get things come in, and they knew the funds would not be restricted to any cause. They didn't have any constituency that they had to follow up with, because a lot of these organizations and chapters ain't got nobody in them. And that's what will come out, and they will say, we represent Black folks. So, I mean, what more can you say? It's nonsense. I'll pass it back to y'all.
Yeah, I'm laughing, but it ain't funny. You know, it's one of them things you can't do nothing but laugh. Travis, what you got, brother?
Yeah, I actually did. I broke this down in an article explaining what happened. So after Ferguson 2014, the rise of BLM, there was already, so think about this. First, the ideology starts in the academy. So I talked about this earlier during the segment. The people like Barbara Ransby actually worked directly with Alicia Garza, and of course subsequently worked with Opal and Patrice, right? So there's this notion, there's this particular ideology that comes out of the academy, right? So they elite capture, and they elite capture basically, well, y'all see, kill Darren Seals, right? And let me be clear about this. I want to be clear about the language, especially sometimes to the masses. BLM is not responsible for Darren Seals' death. I am not saying that. But what I am saying, we talked about this in our org, they created the conditions, right? So the conditions happen with those who are actually doing the work. And let me be clear about this too. The goal has always been, whenever from the COINTELPRO 2.0 up to date, is to destabilize the movement. Let me say that again. The goal from Fred Hampton to even across the water to Patrice Lumumba to here now with Darren Seals, the goal is to effectively destabilize the movement, right? So you destabilize the movement. You take this ideology that was prominent in academia, you move this now, where now these quote unquote activists, right? These activists coming out of BLM and affiliated organizations are working together. Activism and academia are working together. And so then you need the third part of this. And what's the third part? Politics, the Democrat Party. So now you have academia, activism, and the Democratic Party all working together. And so now what do you see happening in that video, right? This literally what I just explained makes perfect sense now, because there's a particular ideology which is empowering to groups, right? Because remember, this ideology is we need to decenter Black men, right? We need to center particular groups, right? So in centering those groups, what do y'all see constantly in the media? Let's center those groups. And then in centering those groups, let's then give them the forefront, and let's push forward the Democratic Party. So then a lot of the funding that BLM brought in also went to the Democratic Party. And now all that comes together where you can see on the Washington Monument, where we were originally, and we still are, F-12, against police brutality, for Black freedom, to now actually upholding democratic, quote unquote, democratic values, right? And which is really the Democratic Party, and twerking on the monument.
Yeah, I was just on an interview before I started this live up, and I made a mention of that, to the fact that a lot of the stuff that you're seeing that people are hot about, and now there's a conversation in electoral circles because the midterms are coming, and most likely it's going to be a massacre because it's going to be terrible. There's a conversation about Black men in electoral politics now, because now the Democratic power brokers are starting to realize that they cannot hope to win with half of an electorate. And there's been a lot of pandering towards Black women that seems like they're respecting Black women, but it's really pandering. And if you look at that video, some of that same stuff that you see in that video, and a lot of these things that people say they're tired of, like the twerking and the dancing, getting your booty to the poles and all this sort of stuff, there's a direct line from that stuff that we see where people are dancing and shucking and driving in pole booths to stuff like that, because the people they listen to are people from these organizations. And if they co-sign stuff like that, and if they co-sign twerking on tanks and twerking in front of the cops and everything when cops got batons and riot gear, then it makes sense for them to think that if you say do stuff like this, then maybe the Black electorate will respond to this. And when Black men said, no, we're not going for that, and when a lot of Black women said, we're not going for this, now you're starting to see some of these narratives starting to change. That doesn't mean they care about you anymore. It just means that they realize that they have to change tactics. But all this stuff comes from this idea, because, the people who had the mic in the midst of the George Floyd episode were people who were co-signing all this stuff. So now this is how they think they got to talk to Black people. Martin, I see you nodding your head, brother. What's on your mind?
Yeah, that's what it was, because a lot of the activism started to move into electoral politics. So being in the BLM 10, or having been in there, not anymore, just to be clear, but that was one of the ideas.
Before you go further, can you explain to the public? Can you explain to the people what the BLM 10 is about? Can you give the background on that so people know?
Yeah, so BLM 10 are the first 10 organizations, first 10 chapters that left the Black Lives Matter network in 2020. Before Black Lives Matter grassroots, or around that time, these chapters wrote a letter of accountability and said, we out. There's a lot of other chapters that didn't sign on to the letter, left the network as well, but they were talking about this sort of shift in politics and this lack of accountability that the larger Black Lives Matter organization had. What made it important for these 10 organizations, with which BLM Boston was a part of, added on afterwards, what made that important is that the Black Lives Matter organization had marketed itself so effectively as the center of the movement that now people were affiliating whatever position that they had with the movement itself, and whatever position they had with whoever was using the mantra. So they was using, again, this elite capture, to use all of that momentum to move into electoral politics and try to shift it toward Democratic candidates and try to have conversations with the White House. Remember when Biden got elected, they put out that tweet talking about we won, and like, who was we? You know what I'm saying? Like, but they had their own agenda around how they wanted to be connected with the power, political parties in power, and they. So what they did was position themselves as the farthest to the left, and anything farther to the left than them was too radical. So now all of these chapters and activists that were calling them out, well, we don't know, they might have been infiltrated, they're not a part of us. So when they took a position, they also delegitimized any other chapters of people who were interested in joining the movement that took on a name and say, well, they're not real, we can't trust them, you should follow us. So I can talk about this all day, but that's the long and short of how the Democratic Party ultimately captured all of that momentum that the radical energy of people like Darren Seals was not on in the beginning. And these people who came into these different cities trying to get the momentum, trying to build relationships, trying to raise money, moved into what they wanted to do the whole time anyway.
Gotcha. Thank you for clarifying that. And I know I have a very educated audience, but I just want to drop this on the people. The idea of elite capture. In a nutshell, the idea of elite capture is there is a very small finite pool of very wealthy donors and organizations that have money that they either want to give to charity or they want to fund social programs. the idea of elite capture is making your organization or making your cause so loud that the first people they see when there's money to happen, when there's a tragedy or there's money to be given out, they get in front of that so they can be first in line for whatever money's going to be doled out or whatever influence is going to be doled out. And that's what elite capture is. Like if you can get yourself in front of, some major donor with billions of dollars to give away as a tax write-off, if you get in front of that, you're set. And that will fund anything you want to do. And usually what these people do and these corporations do and these funds do is they write a check and then they back away from it. They don't deal with it. And they let things basically run themselves. So that's what elite capture really is. What happens in politics, it happens in the corporate world, and it happens in activism, because unfortunately in this American system, activism has become a business and it's become commercialized in a capitalist society. I want to move on to a couple of things. We talked about it earlier on the show, but I want to talk a little bit about language and how language and class kind of work together. As you said, Martin, the narrative began to form that challenging the agendas that crept into movement work was challenging the idea that Black lives are valuable. And you saw a lot of people who questioned the direction and goals of the organization and other organizations allied to that formed around Black justice work. They began to get silenced by being labeled problematic, and that definitely happened to Darren Seals. That not only stopped any discussion, but it made people not even want to be seen as quote unquote problematic, because once you got saddled with that, nobody wanted to deal with you inside the organizations or outside of it. Again, Darren fell victim to this. And Travis, how does that happen and why does that happen?
Can you say the part right before Darren fell victim to this?
Yeah, well, how does somebody who's on the ground and connected to a community get pushed out of movement work, and why does that happen?
Yeah, so I would say on one hand, it doesn't happen in that those people like Darren Seals, if he never would have got killed, he still would have been doing the work, right? And like me, I'm doing the work. What's happening is we're being silenced of sort, right? And it's kind of crazy because just a moment of transparency. I was thinking about this even before this interview. I'm like, do I want to be known, right? Because on one hand, like you're saying, Torraine, people need to know the truth. People need to know about the real work that's happening with the movement. On the other hand, I think, Mark, you might have mentioned this. The more I'm known, the more I become a target. So I would say that the work, nothing is stopping the work from happening, right? What's stopping is the narrative around the work, and this is something else Darren Seals talked about a lot, and this is why another reason why they got rid of him. Revolutionary unity. He didn't call it revolutionary unity, but I'm gonna call it that because I want us to remember this. Revolutionary unity. He said this: we need to put our differences. So let's talk about this language, right? Okay, let's say it this way. I'm outside of academia. I may not understand what intersectionality is. You know what? Patriarchy and particular pronouns, etc., may not mean that much to me, right? And to be clear, y'all, because I'm in both academia and read, because I literally travel the world. I go around asking people, what does this mean? What does this mean? What does this mean? And a lot of this language, a lot of people outside of the academy doesn't understand. So what Darren Seals said was, look, there are people who may not understand what misogynoir is, or anti-racist Black misandry is, right? Or being able to make sure this person know their pronouns and this and that. But do you care about freedom so much that you are willing to let these differences aside so that we can work together and get free? That's the energy that D. Seals was on. And I think that's when it comes to language, right? And I guess, so to answer your question, on one hand, it doesn't stop the work because we are continuing to do the work. But I guess you're right, it is stopping the work in the sense, are you going to allow this language difference to divide us, to be so divisive to the point that we can't even work together? Because are these language differences, and this is the question D. Seals asked that I've been wrestling with, It's misgendering you worse than the effects and the problems of living under a white supremacist colonial society. Would you rather have your pronouns correct on the plantation or struggle with this, right? Struggle with this, but get rid of the plantation altogether? These are some that Darren Seals really gets us to struggle with and gets us to think about and gets us to ask that we need to answer.
And that goes into my next question. The machinery of black male death. I think Martin, you mentioned it, and Travis, me and you have talked about this a lot. I pulled the numbers from the CDC and also from a couple of websites. One is Mapping Police Violence, and then the Washington Post tally that they keep of police encounters. If you listen to chatter online, it sounds like the murders and the killings of black people by police is basically it's basically neck and neck. But here's the truth. Since 2014 up until 2021, when was the last final tally of murders, 1,677 black men have been killed in police encounters. The number of black women killed in police encounters in that same amount of time is 77. So that's one black life taken every day over the last 5, almost 6 years. That's not saying that none of these murder, one is more valid than the other based by gender. But the fact of the matter is, if we just look at the numbers, and then if we extrapolate that into some of the life outcomes for black men are at the bottom of every socioeconomic metric in this society, whether it's violence, whether it's incarceration, whether it's police brutality, whether it's death by police. All these things are there. But this idea has sprung up in a lot of social justice movement spaces that black men have to be moved aside to let other people speak. And again, that's not to say that there aren't people who are in other marginalized communities that don't have the right to speak. But if we're going to be out here and if we built a movement based on black death, especially black male death, why is there so much hostility with allowing black men to speak? And why is there so much hostility about even addressing the concerns that face black men economically, socially, and everything else? Martin, I'd love to get your take on that, and then I'll swing around to Travis.
Yeah, so language is important. Let me start there. One of the things that people were saying very early on is that they wanted to focus on the most marginalized, which in most marginalized is different from most impacted. Most impacted is related to a particular metric. Most marginalized is ideological. So people had a position that they wanted to have, and the assumption that if there is something harmful happening to the black community by nature, is happening more to black women than black men. Before the data came out from the Washington Post, people were saying that black women are killed more and we just don't talk about it. That's just an ideological assumption that they had in a position that they had. People, I heard it many times. This was back then. You know, when people were sort of faced with the idea that the evidence. So when people were faced with the idea that the evidence did not support the position that they wanted to have, we had to come face to face with how some people looked at the movement, or some organizations looked at the movement, as they thought, well, we want women to lead these conversations because we feel like it's time. But it didn't quite make sense relative to particular goals that we had to try to preclude anyone as leaders. If we wanted to end police brutality, we have to actually talk about police brutality, and the data show that men are dying at a far disproportionate rate. So if we move that and take it off the table, our intervention strategies change. And now this money that we're taking in can go all other different types of places because now it's no longer bound to that particular thesis. You understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I get it. It's like when you uncouple the original meaning why people are out there, and you make the language dance around till it means anything, especially if you're not giving people enough education outside of the academy and outside of these activist circles where this language and this jargon is really prevalent. then you can make a word mean anything you want. So that's what happens. But yeah, but that goes back to my point about the fact that people are saying this stuff and they're just repeating this almost by rote without doing any real research into the real hard numbers of what things look like. And these numbers are coming, well, not the number, but that rhetoric is coming out of a lot of academia, and it's coming out of a lot of accepted activist and movement spaces. But a lot of times the people who are saying this stuff either know it to be false and they're creating a narrative, or they have not even done the reading themselves. And because they have some numbers behind some letters and numbers behind their name, people go with it. And I think that's very scary. And Travis, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I would say it's because Black revolutionary unity can actually bring Black freedom. So let's think about this, right? If we had, so first, where is this language coming from? Like I said at the beginning, this is coming from the academy. Who primarily is running the academy? White people. This is a white language. Our ancestors, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, Frederick Douglass, all them, Ida B. Wells, they weren't talking about any of this language that we're using now, right? So let's be clear. We have a white influence language. Shout out to Marimba Anai, right? Because her book is amazing. She talks about this, right? Europeans aim to control, is basically there's I don't want to, it determines cultural hegemony, right? And I hate to use all these academic terms, but basically Europeans aim to control culture, right? They waged war on Black culture. Along with that, they wanted control in controlling Black culture, also controlling Black thinking, right? So we can say, look, this is how Black folks talk and how they take with each other. Then we can infiltrate and get them to start using this particular language that's going to do what? Cause division. So this divisive language, right? Because think about this, like I was saying earlier, we can recognize that there are particular issues that Black men deal with. There are particular issues that Black women deal with. There are particular issues that gender non-binary Black folks deal with. There are particular issues that Black queer folks deal with, right? So that we can have a conversation about those issues without us fighting against each other, right? So if we had that conversation in a productive and fruitful way, then that can bring unity. And if you have Black people unified and organized together, then that's going to weaken the power structure. And as that weakens the power structure and we get power, then we can actually move towards Black freedom.
All right. I want to pull a couple more clips. This is another
if I can jump in on it.
Yeah, go ahead, brother. Go right ahead. Martin, you there?
Martin, you muted. You got to unmute.
Coming in a little bit choppy, brother. Yeah. And I can't hear you. Unmute your mic.
Back on.
Yeah, you're coming in clear. I can hear you, but you're a little bit choppy.
I'm choppy. Okay, just come back to me.
Yeah, there you go. No, it sounds like you're good now. Yeah, you might be having a little bit of trouble. Yeah, okay. There you go.
Okay. Yeah, so I want to explain how this bottlenecked the movement. So get people with a need to learn diverse terms and concepts made from the academy or other marginal spaces. What this group that comes in that is foreign to some, local to others, that want more about issues of diversity, they come in and say, if you don't know this language, we don't need you. Not we're going to steal you up. Not we're going to work with you. We don't need you. So now you have a more narrow group of people who represent what activists are asking for. So when I say over time, it became less and less and less because you have one particular perspective. For a lot of people, it was Black queer feminism. If you do not understand it or fall in line with it, we don't need you and we're not going to educate you. So now you have less and less people coming to the forefront. And as we know, with Black radical tradition, there's many ideas and we need all of them to get free. So that's what I saw happening. And
Gotcha. It sounds like you might be chopping up again, brother. If you need to come out and come back in, feel free. Travis, can you hear it?
Yeah, you want me to say his? Did you hear his point?
I heard the last part. I heard the last, like, I didn't get the last 30 seconds of it.
So basically, he was saying was that if you take the Black queer feminist approach, then it's almost as if they have a monopoly on what the movement is and what it should look like, right? And because of that, if you don't fall in line with this particular ideology, and then along with this ideology, the language along with that ideology, then one, we don't need you in the movement, but two, you are, according to this perspective, you are now aligning with the oppressor, right? Now you're being misogynist. Now you're being anti-Black. Now you are, now you're being anti-Black and you're supporting whiteness and white supremacy.
Gotcha. Let's talk about how movements survive. Movements need money to survive, and you have to be able to feed the people that you want to save. Over the last 5 years, we've seen the imagery of social justice become commercialized. Is this necessarily a bad thing? We've seen people who are in activist circles, get TV deals. We've seen some people who are legitimate, create partnerships with corporate America. Is it necessarily bad to be able to fund what you're trying to build, or is it because you can't do everything you can crowdfund, you can do different things, but because we live in a society and everything gets commercialized, there are people who are willing to fund some of these things. And I do think there are some people inside the machine that actually see how horrible things are and they want to try to help as best they can. Don't hold me to that because I can't guarantee it. But how does that work? How does it work trying to build your movement and fund it without having to completely bend over and be completely subservient to the system? Is that possible? Martin, I'll ask you.
Well, white supremacy is not going to fund its own demise. It doesn't work that way. Now, you will get a lot of racial justice initiatives that seek to build collaboration and different models of affinity and intervention, the things that we're dealing with. But if you're talking about white supremacy as a system, it won't do that. In order to continue the function of your community building, you need to have the community invested in it. Because to do intervention work in community and to do rallies and political education, it doesn't take off. You just need to be able to galvanize what you have there. And I think a lot of people don't realize that what they have is important, and they think Black Lives Matter as an organization got $90 million and with no executive director and 3 board members. It takes more than money to be able to build something that lasts. And I wish we would see more of the value of our people that we have.
Travis, what are your thoughts on this? I know you saw this up close, so I'd love to hear what you have to say. And I know you're working with your organization too. So
man,
what's that?
On one hand, this is frustrating because let me say this as clearly as possible. The movement needs money, right? Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, what BLM has hurt in so many ways, because now not only did it hurt in how they've taken the money, but they've hurt in how they've created this distrust for money, right? So if you listen to what D. Seals said, even in the clip that you played, he said the same way that we had tithes and offerings where we get 10% at church, we need to have a Black community fund where people are giving 10% to the Black Community Fund. Look, I ain't gonna hold you, and Torraine know this. I've been in the movement. I'm still in the movement, and there have been times when I work in the movement when my checking account was overdrawn, right? Because doing movement work, when you actually do the real movement work, you lose your job. Like, so if y'all don't know, just Google Travis Hurst VCU. You lose your job, or you get kept for funding, right? So I literally would have to hustle here and there, do a show, just try to survive. But the movement needs money, and I just want to reiterate how important that is.
I got you. And speaking of money and speaking of needing money, I'm gonna blast my thing out here one more time and everything. I promise if you give it to me, I'm not gonna buy 5 houses. I'll just get one, and the rest of it will go to getting more equipment and getting better headsets and stuff like that. Appreciate y'all donating, showing love so I could get a decent, better mic. Is my voice sounding better than the old headphones I used to wear? All right, cool. If you like the content I'm making and you rock with what I'm doing, please feel free to donate to the channel and help support the work. Cash App Torraine Walker. My PayPal is Real Torraine Walker. I have a Patreon, Torraine Walker, and my Venmo is Torraine Walker. And there's links to everything also on the chat, so you can go and pull those up too if you'd like to. And I promise, all the money goes to help funding these messages and everything like that. I'm not going to be clinking no glasses in the room or nothing like that. I promise. I want to pull 2 more clips, because these are clips that happen in the wake of George Floyd, and this also speaks to the amount of mission creep that we're dealing with the idea of mistrust, and also the seriousness of how these things have moved on from like the seriousness of the issues to where we are now. The first one is video taken in Minneapolis after the murder of George Floyd. Again, this shows how energies and cycles. This is 5 years after the speech that Darren Seals made, where the energy's back again. And I'm going to show you what happened a few days after that. So here we go. This is the first clip from Minneapolis.
Glorious. It's glorious. It's amazing. We stood up for something. We stood up for something.
They're gonna hear us today.
Burn this down and they need to go to jail. All 4 officers need to go to jail and these need to burn down. Then I feel like justice is served. I just hope that they can finally feel our pain, because I know everyone out here has encountered with police that they never get their feelings or like anything they feel across, honestly. And it's just like everyone's hurt and they're tired of the BS.
All right, that was footage taken from the uprising in Minneapolis after the murder of George Floyd. That was the energy on the ground. They torched the police station. People were out there speaking, and these were street people who were articulate. Okay, now when that happened, the whole world paid attention to that, and money started flowing into Minneapolis. Money started flowing into all these different organizations. And once that happened is when you started seeing the elite capture happen again, and that's when the things that were the groundwork that was laid in Ferguson really blew up. So now that the idea of Black pain and the murder of Black men had everybody's attention, this is what you began to see in as far as like outreach for the community. Here we go.
My name is Patrice Cullors, and welcome to Fuck White Supremacy, Let's Get Free with the Hammer Museum. I want you all to step in wherever you are and do the electric slide with me. This performance is for every single person who is being impacted by white supremacy, every single person that's being impacted by COVID-19, by sexism, homophobia, transphobia. Let's dance together.
Revolution on the Street, sponsored by corporate America. I don't know what the obsession is with dancing. I I don't know why the solution. I don't know who came up with this idea that the solution to black problems is line dancing and pulling rappers from 2005 out so we can pop block and dance all the way down to the polls. But yeah, that show that's it wasn't quite as elaborate as a Pepsi commercial, but this is what we get. You know what I mean? You have the energy from the street where people are articulating their needs and their frustration, and somehow that translates into pop blocking and doing the Macarena with riot cops. Uh, Martin, what are your thoughts on this about mission creep and how we go from one thing that's serious to something that's completely unserious? Every time I show these clips, y'all look like y'all be ready to cuss.
Man, everybody can't get a. You feel me? Like, I mean, what do you say to that? What do you? I don't. What do you? Yeah, I'm just passing back to y'all.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
You want me to go or
go ahead, brother? Because I feel like I'm about to.
Yeah. So I was outside. I actually know exactly where that was in Minneapolis. I'm like, I hope y'all see my face. But no, I had a mask on, so y'all, I'm good. But for me, that was a reminder, right? And this is why I was saying that the work continued. And it's like, yo, like it on one hand, before we got to the Patrice, it felt good, right? Because Gil Scott-Heron said it best. The revolution, what? The revolution will not be televised.
Huh.
And so the good thing, the thing that you see, thanks to Gil Scott-Heron, and when you see what she said, listen to the language that she used. She said homophobia, sexism, I think she may have said ableism, but what you did not hear was police brutality, torture or terror against black men, or things, or the language about specifically what had happened. Right? She didn't even say George Floyd's name, which is very interesting because literally everyone was like, "Oh yeah, I'm George Floyd." And I'm gonna tell y'all, as someone who was out there, right, it was beautiful to see us working. It was beautiful. This was a good reminder of Black unity, right? And this is why I talk about Black unity so much, because I saw it, right? I was a part of it. But when we said, "I am George Floyd," let me be clear about this, right? In many ways, gender is not confined in these situations, right? There were literally it wasn't just men saying, "I am George Floyd." Everybody who was out there was saying, "I am George Floyd."
And not just black people either.
Now, they did not degender or take away gender or do anything against George Floyd. Everybody understood that George Floyd was a black man, and we wanted the police to stop killing black men. But there was also this clear sense of this unification against white supremacy and towards black freedom, where we're saying, you know what? It's about George Floyd, but on the ground, the message was, it's bigger than George Floyd, because George Floyd pointed to first police terrorism, and police terrorism points to this long problem of white supremacy. So on the ground, when we was there, we was fighting, like you saw that, we wanted justice. We wanted those 4 cops locked up. We wanted those 4 cops locked up, not just because of the police terrorism, but also because we was a sign of us moving forward towards dismantling white supremacy. And I can tell you, on the ground, we was working, bro. And I can proudly say, all the money that I raised went directly to the people in Minneapolis. right? So I actually was able to raise money, and I got pictures, I got receipts. You can follow me on Facebook. I got it. But we were giving out tampons, diapers, etc. For people who don't know, this was right in the middle of the COVID, and so they got hit double hard in Minneapolis because we had both the uprising and everything was shut down from COVID. So a lot of the stores was closing. People weren't getting like their insulin, their medicine and stuff, and we were on the ground. And so the work continued, right? And because we were dealing with police terrorism, but we were meeting the needs of Black people on the ground. So it was about George Floyd, but it wasn't just about George Floyd. It was bigger than George Floyd, and it was everyone included, not just Black people, but everybody.
Gotcha, Martin. We're the serious state when it comes to like Black activist work. Is this movement dead? Do you think? Or what do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's transitioned. Our job now is to make room for the next up and coming activists that are learning how to understand what to do in the age of social media, how to raise money, how to have integrity as it relates to your movement goal and purpose, how to have movement goals and purposes, how to have political education, how to actually know what your values are and what you want. Are you an abolitionist? Are you not? You need to know where you stand relative to what you're going to push for. And a lot of people didn't quite learn that. So I think for the people who've gone through this, we have to give them education on how to be ready for the next time.
All right. Travis, what are your thoughts? Is the movement dead, and can it be rehabilitated, or do we need to build a new thing like Martin said?
I don't think I have a different perspective of the movement, because I don't think the movement can ever die. But for me, I would say the quote unquote BLM movement, I want that joint to die. Right? Yeah. Let BLM die. In fact, a plug for my organization. As Torraine gave the introduction, I am the director of Black Revolutionary Education International Black Freedom Alliance, THEIBFA.org. Again, that's THEIBFA.org. We believe that Black people are smart enough, talented enough, get the skills and tools necessary in order to get free. Our founders came out, they were Ferguson frontliners. So shout out to, as I mentioned earlier, Tori Russell, Hebrew, and a lot of our founders. They were there on the front line. In fact, you can really say shout out to D. Seals, because he was really influential in this organization. As in, he didn't start the IBFA, but right at it was in his journey from like I said earlier, from Detroit Red to Malcolm X. He was working with Torraine on building an organization, because what they saw in Ferguson was, yes, we needed the uprising, right? We needed the protest and the way, not the marching around in the circles protest, but the protest and what they did in Ferguson. We needed that. But what they also realized was that wasn't going to get us free. We were going to need an organization. So they probably killed him at this point, because he was literally at the point with Torraine and some other people where they were developing organization. That's when he got killed. The organization did get developed, and that's what I'm a part of, the International Black Freedom Alliance. So yes, I would love for the quote unquote Black Lives Matter movement to die. But the movement of resistance that started since the transatlantic slave trade, where we were fighting against the British and the French and the Portuguese and the Spanish, that movement is still going on. And I don't think it's going to never stop until we get free.
All right, and I think that's where we're going to land our plane tonight. I want to thank you, brothers, for joining me. It was an intense conversation, but a necessary conversation. Martin, you got anything you're working on that you want to plug and shout out to anybody to let people know about?
Yeah, I want to shout out to Don Jeffrey from my hometown, Little Rock, Arkansas. She's an activist that's incarcerated. Look up Little Rock Freedom Fund. We're trying to get her out. If you want to follow me on Martin H. Speaks, or my organization at B Men Foundation on all social media handles, and at bmenfoundation.org.
All right, Travis, what do you got for me?
Oh man, I'm a lot. I'll just go with Hood Scholar on all social media, and I've personally, and Torrin, you know this. I've been doing a lot of work recently on Black male studies because a lot of these narratives out here about Black men are just off and just wrong, and they really use a deficit model to talk about us. So if you just look at my socials, I just recently published a special issue that dispels a lot of these myths about Black men. Because if we properly understand Black men, then no, unlike BLM, we don't need to decenter we don't need to decenter anyone. We need to decenter white supremacy, work together. Black unity plus Black love brings Black power, and Black power brings Black freedom.
All right, so that's what we'll land our plane. Travis, Dr. Hood Scholar, Martin, thank you so much, brother. If you want to check for these brothers again, check out their social media pages and also check out their work. These are some really solid guys. Anything they're doing, please support it. Again, Martin Henson, Travis Harris, PhD. Thank you so much, brothers, for coming through. Peace. And thank everybody, and thank you all for coming in for another episode of Torraine Walker TV. I will be back here next week with another episode, another fire conversation, and another dope panel. Again, thank you all so much for checking me out. And again, I apologize for the 2-week delay and stuff, but I'm back in the city now, so I can make more videos for you. And please keep supporting the channel so I can keep buying fly microphones and headsets and everything, and I can get a better backdrop and everything. Everybody be good. Have a good night. Everybody be safe. Much love. One love. Peace.